welcome on behalf of the Club of Rome Austrian chapter. As president, I may welcome all of you, and I'm very happy that so many came back. But of course, especially want to welcome Sandrine Dixson-Declève, our co-president of the International Club of Rome. Sandrine will make a presentation. She has a long career, also she's still very active and young in international politics, in academic field, in the United Nations framework. So there are many, many issues. If I would tell all of that, it will take the whole time of your presentation. We're very glad that you are here. We're very grateful because we know that you're very, very busy. And without further ado, I would again welcome you. And we are happy that you have been elected together with the colleague of South Africa, Mamphela Ramphele, in 2018 as co-president of the International Club, and it got new dynamics and energy. And please, Sandrine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hans and Friedrich and the others, and Klaus and all of you from the Club of Rome Austrian chapter. I'm really pleased to be here, and I have a little funny anecdote, which is I've just come from the large German aviation conference, and on the panel, the moderator just asked me if I thought that the Austrian approach to the aviation sector was the right one in terms of putting a base price, and I said absolutely, and I said on top of it, I'm going straight over to the Austrians when I'm finished with this panel. So I thought that it was interesting. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to give you a little bit of what I see as the insight and the shifts at the international level and also at the European level. I'm going to go to the next slide and show you, okay, so now for some reason it's not working. There we go. Where I feel we've really moved on from the limits to growth, and what is an important reminder that as we sit here and as we're being told that actually we need to save the planet for the next generation, we have to remember that Dana Meadows, one of the authors of The Limits to Growth, made exactly the same point 50 years ago. And that to me is a clear reminder of how little we have done, unfortunately, and how much more there is to do and how little time we have. And I think time is really of the essence. We're calling this the decade of action. COVID-19 clearly has brought in another element of complexity. We talk now about the convergence of tipping points between health pandemics, climate, and biodiversity. In the last 2 years, we have seen a series of melting pots of different kind of doomsday scenarios around the loss of species, around climate, enhanced catastrophes, and obviously clearly now the health pandemic, all of which are deeply interrelated if we look at how systems are actually integrated. And so it's really important for us at the club, at the international level, as the Austrian chapter knows, that to work with scientists and economists is at this time fundamental to do two things: to kind of shift from just talking about science and thought leadership, but also to ensure that we translate that into real action. So 2 years ago, some of us at the Club of Rome started what we call the Planetary Emergency Plan. We actually started with the Climate Emergency Plan at the same time, or just before even, then Greta and the youth started to call the climate emergency. At the club, we very much brought together scientists to say, we now need to have key commitments that are the exact measurable types of commitments that we need for the crisis that we have in front of us. And so we split up our planetary emergency plan into 20 actions. The first 10 commitments are for the global commons that you see here. And then the next 10 commitments are the urgent actions for the transformation. And those urgent actions for the transformation have focused on 3 key areas. And again, this is very much based on Johan Rockström's work around the planetary boundaries and the way in which we've been working with Kate Rayworth around donut economics. So the first is, especially now, creating just and equitable societies. How do we ensure that we bring people's lives and livelihoods into a conversation around the transformation? How do we bring people on the journey? How do we revolutionize actually the taxation system? And then we move into clearly transforming the energy system, where we know that we have the greatest impact and the greatest substantial contribution if we actually shift our fossil energy system into a renewable, electrified, and much more optimized and efficient system. And here we have talked very specifically around the elimination of subsidies and perverse subsidies, but also tripling the investments that we need on an annual basis with regard to renewable energy, both in the North and the South. And then shifting to a circular economy. And here we talk about internalizing externalities, working through the entire material chain, but also very much ensuring that we decouple our material use from our economic progression, because we're not going to use growth in this presentation, but instead talk about economic development. So if we go to the way in which the Club of Rome and the work that I've been doing has responded both to COVID and these other two crises, and work directly with policy leaders at the European level, at the international level, what we have indicated is that we truly see the transformational change is possible. It's difficult. It's sad that we need to be confronted with a crisis in order to do it. But the fact of the matter is that if you understand and tap into the consciousness of people today, they will admit that they don't necessarily want to go back to business as usual. They will also demonstrate a series of human shifts, of changes, behavioral changes that they have put into place, which we have been indicating in the environmental community forever, and others have been saying are so difficult, and yet when you're forced with it, you do it. So how do we design ourselves out of this mess rather than just react? How do we actually also respond to the technology, governance, and socioeconomic systems that are really mutating in front of our eyes, that are totally shifting? And how do we actually have really fast and strong responses that can assist people now, but also create the resilience in the system that we need to confront future crises? So what we've been doing is working with the European Commission and again, the institutions on looking at what does a COVID-19 recovery look like? For us, it means not giving up on the European Green Deal, not giving up on our climate objectives, ensuring that we continue the SDGs, but that we work towards very much a resilient and low carbon economies and nature-rich societies, towards a regenerative type of model. That we invest in renewable energy instead of fossil fuels, in nature and reforestation, in sustainable food system and regenerative agriculture, and that we shift to more local, circular, and low carbon economy. And what's interesting is already from a governance perspective, the European Commission in terms of research and innovation has already changed its organogram and its departments to focus on people, planet, and prosperity. So you have 3 departments now in research and innovation in the European Commission. 1 on people, 1 on planet, and 1 on prosperity. And what I'm also doing now as chair of a new think tank within the Commission is cross-fertilizing between those. Well, how do you unpack the tensions? How do you start to look at how we can optimize the relationship between people, planet, and prosperity, but also take into consideration the trade-offs, which we know are so important, in particular when we look at taxation. And this is the think tank I was talking about. So it's called ISIR, which is Economic and Societal Impacts of Research and Innovation. And we've come up with some thinking around first ensuring that we protect people and that we look at shifting towards prosperity for all, that we prepare people for the next crises, and that we transform our economies to become more resilient so that they actually can be the basis for the 21st century that we want. I'm sure that most of you have heard the State of the Union address from President von der Leyen. Working directly with the President and the Cabinet, the Club of Rome was actually quite honored, myself in particular, to be invited to several brainstorming sessions that prepared her State of the Union address. And what's fundamental and phenomenal is to see that a card-carrying conservative, such as the President, has decided to embrace a European Green Deal and language, which in the past would have been seen as leftist or green. And here we have a commission, which is represented by 3 of the largest parties at the top, who are all speaking the same language. But she also says, let's make sure, again, that we use this opportunity to make change happen by design, not by disaster. That we look at creating opportunities for the world of tomorrow. That we look at the European Green Deal as the blueprint for transformation. And that we also think about systems. I mean, as the Club of Rome, we now have a head of the European Commission that is talking about systems change and systems modernization, and ensuring that we don't just limit our model of growth to value wealth, but to go towards well-being, and to look at the planet within which we live and the fragility of the planetary boundaries. Very interesting when you then dig down into the European Green Deal. And when you start to look at the current pushback, which some of you may be familiar with, on, for example, the farm to fork policy or the common agricultural policy. Because what we're starting to see now within the European Green Deal is we're looking at a systems approach, we're looking at an interconnected system, we're looking at new policies which will come up, which will be very much focused on climate neutrality, but we also are looking at key pushback from the incumbents. Within the farm to fork strategy and the link with biodiversity, for example, the common agricultural policy has in some ways been hijacked by incumbents, both in terms of member states and in terms of companies that felt that it was going too far. It was too green. And so now we're starting to see the difficulty, the complexity of turning the president's words into action, turning the planetary emergency into a real emergence plan. So what we've done actually with Janusz Potocznik, which some of you may know, who's a member of the Club of Rome, an old friend, former commissioner of environment and also research and innovation, and also in Systemic, and I'm also a partner in Systemic, is to come up with a system change compass, which again, very much based on the Club of Rome's systems approach, applies the systems thinking to how do we ensure that we implement the European Green Deal. And we do that through 30 system level interventions and orientations, looking at 3 to 5 ecosystem level orientations, and then bringing in 50 industrial champions where we could really start to finance. So we unpack the European Green Deal in terms of what are the core principles for Europe? What do we then do in terms of systems interventions, ecosystem level orientations, and then what are the key industrial champions in Europe? And I think what's really interesting is from a principles perspective, in the discussions that I had with Janusz and that we also had with the rest of Systemic and some of our Club of Rome members, we decided that redefining prosperity was the #1 principle that we needed to think about. Embracing social fairness for real prosperity, really shifting to new indicators. And I think this follows very much the conversation that we're seeing now at the country level and also at the city level. So those of you who are familiar with donut economics, we know that we need to avoid a crumbling of the donut. We need to have a good balance between the safe and just space for humanity. Kate Raworth's donuts, which by the way, if any of you are tweeting today, has just been referenced as one of the important reference points for Pope Francis, who has just come out with his new book. Her donut is now being applied across different cities, really focusing on the need to ensure dignity, that kind of bringing in justice for all, the challenge to be within the planetary boundaries, the one that really ensures that no one falls behind, and also really looking at how you can implement this within a city space rather than talking about new indicators to growth. And what's interesting is that this is the same approach of the 21st Century Wellbeing Economics report that we have just published at the Club of Rome, myself, and a member of the club, Eileen McLeod, who was former minister of Environment in Scotland. And she and I have been looking at how we can apply 21st century well-being economics to Europe and what that would mean. We already have 5 countries that have applied well-being economics. I don't know if you're familiar with them: Scotland, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Wales, all of which, by the way, are the ones that seem to be coming out better from COVID than most others, more resilient because of the value system that they're starting to develop. By the way, companies that have put in place ESG principles, so those principles around environment, social, and governance, are also seeming to be much more resilient through COVID and post-COVID. So I had one last slide, but it doesn't matter. It seems to have blocked. I think we can leave it at there. Oh, there it is. Okay, I've got it on my screen. But basically, I just want to repeat a few core points. 1, that this is the decade of action. 2, that we're starting to see some real moves in terms of leadership. And 3, that both the political landscape and the business landscape is shifting post-COVID, but also there will be great pushback from incumbents and business as usual. And I think this is the moment of truth. And as the Club of Rome, we must be strategic and effective, not only in passing the right messages, but of giving the right suggestions and recommendations for policy and for new economic indicators.
Sandrine, thank you very much.